First thing that happens is the so-called hinge ready phase. Now this phase is, we call it phase 0. Why do we call it phase 0? Because you stand like this when you start a ballistic exercise, whether this is the swing, the clean, or the snatch, it doesn't matter. You start like this. Why do you start like this? You have the kettlebell approximately half a meter in front of you, or approximately a meter. Then you pull the kettlebell in, you directly connect with your body to start lifting, to start the ballistic movement without having to waste any reps. Most beginners stand over the kettlebell, then they pick it up, it's in the air, and then they start swinging it in a weird way to get it started. And that way you waste your first rep. So this is, we call it, why hinge? Because when you push your hips back, you go into a hinge. I'm almost in a squat in this position, but you get what I'm saying. When you push your hips back and your upper body leans forward, this is what we call a hinge, and we want to get ready for the exercise. So we call it hinge ready phase. Now, the first thing that happens, and in this image, I'm rocking a 24 kilo kettlebell. Now, what happens is I got the kettlebell in a so-called finger grip. What is the finger grip? The finger grip is when you hold the kettlebell right here in your fingers, not with your palm, but with your fingers. Small detail and a little note right here. Once the kettlebell gets heavier, hence I got this little blister right here. Once the kettlebell gets heavier, you probably use more grip from your palm because you're stronger. Because this goes more into a so-called crush grip. Once you use a crush grip, you're using your flexors, which are more powerful. Once you're going into the finger grip, you're using your extensors, which are less powerful. However, they have more endurance. So, grabbing the kettlebell in the finger grip. Now, what you see right here is I got the kettlebell in a back grip as well. Now, this might sound a little complicated, but it's not. Now, first of all, finger grip, grabbing the kettlebell right here in your fingers. And a back grip means the positioning of your wrist. So, you have two positions. You have the first position is where you grab the kettlebell inside of your hand. And what position is your wrist going, or what position are you using? Now, why am I going into a back grip? If I got the kettlebell in a back grip like this, what happens is pretty easy to explain. The kettlebell drops. I got it in the overhead top fixation. We'll come to this phase, and the kettlebell drops. So heavy weight drops down into my body or between my legs. And if I use the back grip, my elbow can flex a little more. So I have less tension in my forearm and my bicep. However, if you choose a front grip, grabbing the kettlebell like this, and it drops into the backswing phase of the lift, and you go back up, you have a lot of tension in your biceps, in your forearm, which can be good. This is not a matter of something's better or something's worse. It is a matter of using the right tool for the right time. Now, the second phase, what happens is a so-called hip extension. And we're calling it hip extension into the vertical position. Because if you have the kettlebell in the backswing and you transport the kettlebell with the power of your hips forward, you're in the so-called horizontal plane. Now, what happens is, if you use a hip extension, you want to go into a so-called vertical plane, not staying in the horizontal plane. If you would stay in the horizontal plane, it would be a normal kettlebell swing. However, transporting or transforming the kettlebell or its trajectory into the vertical plane means I have to do something with my hips and my feet. And this is what you're seeing right here. So I'm using a lot of drive from my hips. The kettlebell goes forward, and I start leaning back immediately. Take a look at my upper body. I'm leaning back immediately. The first thing that happens. The second thing that happens, and you probably ask yourself this question. I have asked myself this question many times when I watched athletes, kettlebell athletes. I'm going on my toes. Why am I stepping on my toes? Because I'm using force, the driving force is my posterior chain of my left leg. This means my hamstrings and my glutes of my left leg are the driving force. And my right leg is the aim. I'd like to compare it to a bow. You have the spring, or the thing between. I think it's a spring, right? And then you have the bow itself. So the spring, where you really use a lot of tension, in this case is my left leg, and the bow where you're aiming is my right leg. So the reason why I'm stepping on my toe is I want to assist the movement that's coming from my left leg using hamstrings and glutes. And I want to aim to the top. So I'm starting to lift my hips. This is what happens. Lifting my hips to go into the vertical plane. The third is the so-called acceleration pull. Once the kettlebell reaches my chest height, I want to use a so-called acceleration pull. For those of you who are familiar with the clean, the acceleration pull happens here as well in phase number 3, but on a much lower level. The acceleration pull at the snatch happens on a very high altitude. So in this case, you see I'm still leaning back, and then I start pulling once the kettlebell is on approximately between chest and shoulder level, and this is preference. I think Vasilyev says that the acceleration pull comes a bit higher or it's a bit slower. But what I love about Denis Vasilyev is, and I'm on his page as well, is he says sometimes it's preference. Some lifters try to do this, other lifters try to do that, and you have to find out what makes you feel comfortable and where you have the most power and the most energy. Now the acceleration pull is pulling the kettlebell up, because now we're in that horizontal plane, and now I want to go into the overhead top fixation. So what happens is I have to start pulling. But the funny thing is the pull is very subtle. It is not a rigorous pull like you would, for example, choose in a deadlift. Because if you would choose a rigorous pull, what would happen is using that force that comes from the kettlebell from the down up, because you use a lot of drive from your hips, and you start pulling very intensively, the overhead top fixation will be broken, because you will almost fall back or lose balance. And maybe this happened to you, losing balance, and it will be tricky and maybe painful for your shoulder, because this force, this drive has to be immediately stopped in your shoulder, and this is not what you want to do. So the acceleration pull is pretty subtle. So the next phase is the so-called hand insertion. If you take a look back, take a look at my finger right here. Now, boom, you see I'm opening up my palm. And once I'm opening up my palm, the kettlebell is already in the so-called hook grip. Hand insertion means switching from the finger grip in the so-called hook grip. Very, very tricky to master. This is not easy to do, and beginners have a lot of problems with the hand insertion, which is normal. And the second problem that most beginners have is once the kettlebell drops, your forearm will experience a little bit of pain. But I'm quoting Steve Carter. I've quoted him so many times. He says, discomfort is okay because it forces us to grow. Pain is probably too much because the body tells us we went too far. So if you have a little discomfort on your forearm because your body has to get used to the weight, has to get used to the kettlebell, and your arm or your bones, your skin, your ligaments, your soft tissues, that's totally fine. Push through it. Now, phase number 5, I call it, most lifters call it the top fixation. I call it the overhead top fixation. That's why it says OH. Overhead, the kettlebell's right here. Now you see my arm is fully extended. And I always call it the Russian extension, because take a look at how the Russian dudes extend their arms. It looks crazy. They have an extension where it almost looks like that the elbow is immediately, it takes probably a second more, and the elbow smashes through the forearm because they're overextending so hard. But this is what you want to achieve. And we see from experience with our clients, once we start overhead top fixation or starting a press, most people do this. And they think that this is an extended arm or that the arm is straight. This is not a problem with people. This is a problem with the triggering. People don't know how to trigger their muscles to a point where the arm is fully extended. They have to get back that feeling, knowing what it feels like, because using an overhead top fixation and a fully extended arm means that you have to engage your triceps. And people sometimes don't even know where the triceps is, and they don't know what it feels like. So you see, it takes a little time to get the neuromuscular aspect dialed in, that you understand, hey, what does it feel like? So once you're in the overhead top fixation, make sure that your biceps is close to your ear, as close as possible, because you want to stay in your center of mass, and your center of mass is right above the middle of your foot. Once you go outside the center of mass, your body experiences additional torque, additional torque and additional moment arm that your body has to compensate for, which will lead to the fact that you will burn additional energy that is unnecessary. Now, phase number 6, you want to initiate the amortization, or they call it the first drop. I call it the amortization, and I'm telling you the reason why. I think amortization is a better word than the drop, explaining you in a second. Now, I'm calling it the corkscrew, because once you got the kettlebell and the overhead top fixation, what you want to do is you want to keep your wrist like this, and then you start twisting it like a corkscrew, right? So you're corkscrewing your wrist like this, and what happens? Now let's take a look at physics. What happens is so interesting. Once you start corkscrewing your wrist, the kettlebell, I have to mention this, bear with me. Once you're in the overhead top fixation, make sure that your thumb points back and that the kettlebell rests on your forearm, on your lateral side of your forearm, not your medial. Make sure that the kettlebell rests outside, not inside. Because once the kettlebell rests outside, what you will profit from is muscular stability. We call it, you're using, you're using structural integrity. So it's skeletal support that you can use to keep the kettlebell in the overhead top fixation. And skeletal support will lead to the fact that you will burn less energy, therefore being able to do more reps. Highly, highly important. I see so many people pronating their hands like this. And this is tricky. You have to keep the kettlebell like this, thumb points back, biceps close to the ear, to profit from the skeletal support. And now, because this is important to know, skeletal support is happening. Now, initiating the amortization, corkscrewing the kettlebell out of the overhead top fixation, what happens is, because the kettlebell is already pointing to your right side or your left side, depending on which arm you're using, is once you just start corkscrewing, the heavy part of the bell itself drops, and here comes our good friend gravity. And gravity starts doing its thing. So that's the reason why you don't want to flip it over your wrist. You want to do a soft corkscrew, because once you flip it, you imagine gravity is already doing its thing, but once you flip the kettlebell, you give gravity an additional kick in the butt, which is unnecessary, because this will be very tough on your shoulder. Now, once you initiate the amortization, phase number 7 is you catch it. You start switching it. Hand insertion, or catching it in the finger grip. Now, Dennis Vasilya says this is also a matter of preference. Some lifters catch it way lower. And what I found is I'm catching the kettlebell way, way, way lower once it gets heavier. Yesterday I did it. We're going to take a look at it. I did a snatch with the 32 kilo, which was crazy. And I felt how I really had to fight, because once you start dropping the kettlebell, the gravity sets in so fast and quickly. It drops, and then you're having a hard time to catch it. And I'm catching it pretty low. But with the 24, I'm able to catch it on a pretty high altitude. Now it goes into the full amortization, which is phase 8. And here comes the reason why I call it amortization. And I'm also leaning back. It is called amortization because I'm compensating for the gravitational pull. Gravity pulls everything down in a straight line, right? This is physics. It's easy stuff. So once I'm dropping weight, the kettlebell gets pulled down from gravity. The gravitational pull gets stronger, like I mentioned before, once you use heavier weight. Now, I want to lean back. Why do I want to lean back? Because I want to compensate for the gravitational pull. If I don't lean back, or even worse, I'm leaning forward, then the gravitational pull will become so hard and so heavy that 9 times out of 10, I will fall, my body will fall outside of the center of mass, therefore losing balance and control. Losing balance is a loss of control. And what I also want to do is with the leaning back is I want to push my hips forward. Once I'm pushing my hips forward, I want to make sure that my arm reconnects to my body as quickly as possible. And then we go back into the backswing. So you see, this is science, guys. This is crucial science, and maybe you think I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I don't think I am, because following these phases helped me tremendously to work the snatch. And this small little blister on my palm is because I snatched with the 32 kilo. And once I'm snatching with the 24 kilo, nothing happens to my hands. They're all good, no blisters. And I'm quoting Denis Vasilyev again. He says, blisters are not supposed to stay forever. Blisters are not supposed to stay with you on your kettlebell journey. Blisters are supposed to go away once you have mastered the technique. And I believe him, because Denis Vasilyev is one of the cleanest technicians when it comes to the kettlebell sport. This dude is so clean with his technique, and he's my motivation. He's where I'm trying to go.